Hey guys, this is Eckhart Slaughter. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars The Bad Batch discussion video. And of course, there was one really big spoiler last episode that I had to avoid putting in my thumbnails and titles because it's something that if I were going in fresh, and when I was going in fresh, I would have wanted to be surprised with. And that was, of course, the reintroduction of one of the greatest bounty hunters in the Star Wars galaxy, Cad Bane. Cad Bane being back is huge for a couple of reasons that I want to discuss on today's episode. And after that, at the end, I think this will be a shorter video. I will get to some hashtag ask at questions, but let's dive right into the opening topic. For those who don't know, Cad Bane is a bounty hunter who featured heavily in Star Wars The Clone Wars, and until now, his fate after The Clone Wars was really unknown. The unfinished and cancelled Clone Wars episodes had Cad Bane losing in a duel to Boba Fett. However, those episodes, because they were never finished, are not actually canon. So he's been in this weird limbo where people were unsure whether that fight was still supposed to happen or whether he's still alive. Well, it turns out from this episode that we probably are getting something in the middle. We get a closer look at Cad Bane's character model created for this episode, and he very clearly has a metal graft or cybernetic implant on his skull. Now, Cad Bane always has had those tubes and the bits around his face. Those could be removed. This looks to be something quite different, and this matches up. If you rewatch the actual duel, it ends pretty ambiguously with both Boba and Cad Bane hitting each other in the head, with Cad Bane's hat flying off, and Boba, of course, suffering damage to his helmet. So although this is just speculation, it does seem like both characters actually did survive the duel, with Cad Bane being a little worse for wear apparently, with now this implant on his head. This makes sense, and it's not really very surprising either, because although the unfinished episodes weren't technically canon, it was rumor that within Lucasfilm, people treated the episodes as if they were canon. I mean, that makes sense. They were developed as an overall part of the Clone Wars, and at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if the show went back and actually showed the flashback of Boba versus Cad Bane. Maybe it's why Cad Bane is taking this bounty. Maybe he needs money for some reason. Maybe because he's been disgraced as a bounty hunter. Either way, although this isn't definitive proof, I'm going to assume, unless proven otherwise, that the duel did happen pretty much as we saw in the unfinished episode, and of course that both individuals survived. Of course, they can choose to go back and overwrite something from the episode, and that's the kind of weird thing about them being unfinished, but still generally within the vision of the Clone Wars. We saw in Season 7 that certain aspects of the Bad Batch arc were changed, and the Martez sisters were added, so it'll be interesting to see how that continually evolves. But this isn't the only real reason why Cad Bane appearing is a major thing. Cad Bane is not going to be a one-episode villain. He, I think, will be a major antagonist in the show moving forward. We know that not only was Cad Bane modeled, but apparently he's got a full starship modeled. You don't bring a character of his importance back just for him to be left off to the sidelines. I think we might see his ultimate fate decided in this show, so him appearing at the sort of mid-season point, I think really indicates where the rest of Season 1 will be heading. But if we don't see Cad Bane die or be disposed of in this series, maybe we'll see him in the book of Boba Fett. I mean, we've had Battle 1 between Boba and Cad Bane, both of them survived. Could we see the two, by the time much older bounty hunters, square off again in over 2 decades later? That would be very interesting, especially because if we were to have another duel, we don't know that Boba Fett would survive. They could hit each other again in the face, but this time leave no survivors. Either way, after Clone Wars Season 7, I predicted that they would either revisit some of these arcs and reanimate them, or that the storylines would be pulled forward for future seasons, and that's what we've gotten here. But yeah, that's all I want to talk about on this. I'm really excited Cad Bane's back. He's such a cool character. If you want to see that image that I referenced in other behind-the-scenes material, make sure you check out the StarWars.com page, the episode guide. They always have really cool look at how the animation is done, what the models look like, and definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of the Bad Batch. I will mention, I'm not necessarily expecting Cad Bane to reappear in Episode 2. This might be something like The Mandalorian, where Baby Yoda disappears. He's off screen for a couple of episodes and we miss him. Same thing with Omega. This, I think, will probably be the Bad Batch looking for Fennec Shand, who they will ask to help find Omega. Alright, so before we end today's shorter video, let's tackle a few hashtag AskEck questions, and as always, if you have a question you'd like to see me answer, leave it down below with the hashtag AskEck. The first question comes from Evergorn18, who asks, what does Phase 2 Commander Cody's armor attachments do? So, Cody is very highly ranked in the clone hierarchy. He's a clone martial commander. In Star Wars Legends, at least, that was the highest rank a clone could achieve, so I assume that the antenna and the other equipment exists because he's working in such an important role with a lot of strategy and tactics and communication involved. He's probably always talking to his superiors on orbiting capital ships, relaying orders to clone groups across the battlefield, so it's important to have that extra strong, extra important communication equipment. Our second question of the day comes from Forrest Dudley. He says, as a crossover fanfiction writer, I was wondering how viable warp drives would be in the Star Wars galaxy. They're obviously far slower than hyperdrives, but would they make traversing places like the unknown regions easier? That's a good question. I think the main difference between a warp drive and something like a hyperdrive from Star Wars is that warp drives typically keep the spacecraft in real space rather than some other dimension like Star Wars' hyperspace or slipspace in Halo. Now, I'm not necessarily sure if that would be any safer because for hyperspace, the biggest danger is running into the mass shadow of an object that exists in real space. I don't know enough about how Star Trek warp drives operate, but I think the main question would be whether those drives could pick up on any sort of anomalies and avoid them. Now, it is kind of weird because space is big, so maybe there is something about the Star Wars universe that in the unknown regions and other parts of space, which makes it particularly dense or turbulent. So that's really the main difference, the dimension that it exists in. So you have to look at whether the danger to your vessel in hyperspace still exists in real space. I think that's the main question. All right, the final question is from Rockman JJ, who says, what would happen if someone jumped out of a hangar bay? This assumes that the ship has particle shields. This is an interesting one. So in Star Wars, there are several different types of shielding. There are ray shields, which protect against energy. There's particle shields, which protect against particles. And there are other types of shields. There's magnetic shields, which are typically the ones used to keep atmosphere within a hangar. So if you look out and it seems like the hangar is just going off into space, it's because there's a magnetic shield there. We also see that the Death Star, for example, had a magnetic field, or I guess you could call it a magnetic shield as well, and the X-Wings just flew right through that. So as we see in The Last Jedi, I think it's pretty accurate that if someone tried to move through a hangar shield, they could do so quite easily. Hangar shields wouldn't typically have particle shielding because that would stop spaceships from flying through. What we see in Episode 3, for example, may be an example of a shield, a particle shield or a ray shield over the hangar, but that's more for defensive purposes. If someone tried to pass through that, they would probably be destroyed. The Revenge of the Sith novelization actually gives some more details about that sequence, and as the shield is still up and Obi-Wan Kenobi's craft is approaching, he puts his ship in full reverse, and some debris crashes into the shield and is destroyed by energy. Some particle shields, maybe really strong ones perhaps, seem to be more of just a physical barrier like the one at Scarif. Ray shields like the one inside the Invisible Hand seem to put off energy. You wouldn't want to jump into one of those. And of course we've got the probably combined shield outside of the Death Star, which in the Rebel fleet have to pull away from, presumably because it would have damaged or destroyed their ships. So it's hard to say exactly what would happen. That's not something that I'm aware of actually happening in Star Wars. At the very best, you would bounce off the shield, but I think far more likely you would be destroyed. So don't try it. That's all I got though for today, guys. As always, hope you had a good one. Be safe, drop a like and a subscribe, and as always, may the Force be with you.